Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and I'm a little bit sunburned. So today I am resuming the Galaxy S4 review, all that you need to know. This time I'm going to be talking about the display on the Galaxy S4. I want to talk about the good points, I want to talk about the bad points, and I'm also going to be comparing it a little bit to the Galaxy S3 and the HTC One, so you can get a little bit of an idea of where it stands. In order to do all of that, I used a display colorimeter, which allows me to stick it on top of the display and do some measurements to see exactly what's going on with the colors and the response curves. So let's go check all of that out. I'm sure it will be revealing and see how this guy does. As far as AMOLED displays go, the Galaxy S4 display is the best that I have seen thus far. On many aspects, it puts the Galaxy S3 to shame. Let's start with the pixel density. This guy has a pixel density of 441 pixels per inch. This guy only has 306 pixels per inch. So we've got a 720p display versus a 1080p display, and this is 5 inches versus 4.8 inches. So yeah, you can bet that there's a lot more sharpness in this one. In terms of what can fit on the page, you can see that they look just about exactly the same, but this guy it doesn't even compete with the sharpness of the text on this one. Even though this guy still has somewhat of a pentile type of arrangement, I will definitely be getting into that in a lot more depth in a little bit. The new arrangement just makes it look a lot more sharp than what we have on the Galaxy S3. The Galaxy S3 to me had a nice display, but it really just had a hatchy looking effect on just about anything that you were looking at. So even though they call this a 720p display, it felt so much less than that. Now, as compared to the Galaxy S3, the Galaxy S4 makes leap and bound improvements over the viewing experience that I had during videos with the Galaxy S3. During videos on the Galaxy S3, I had a lot of black clipping. Now, black clipping is where images get too dark way too quickly to where you lose all the detail. So instead of seeing some detail in the shadowing, all you see is black. And that was something that was so irritating. It was something that affected the Galaxy S3 Exynos version because the Snapdragon version seemed to lose this black clipping problem as soon as you started using a third-party movie player. This seemed to be because the Exynos version of the Galaxy S3 had Samsung's own mobile digital natural image engine, which applied a profile throughout the entire phone. So whether it saw the Samsung player or it saw a third-party player, it said, oh, it's a video, and it applied this black clipping terrible profile over any video that you were watching. But on the Snapdragon version, if you were using a third-party player, since it didn't have the mobile digital natural image engine, you weren't in trouble. We are going to nerd out in a moment with some graphs, but the first thing that I want you to know is whether you had the Snapdragon version of the Galaxy S4 or the Exynos version of the Galaxy S4, the behavior applied across the devices is the same. Samsung has figured out how to get their scenarios, their profile scenarios, to work on both phones. So, this is quite improved. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Take a look at the image that is on the right and at the image that is on the left. They're both the exact same image. You're looking at a gradient that goes from gray at 21 all the way down to black at 0. On the Galaxy S3 on the right, you can see all the way down until 8. But after that, everything is black. That is exactly what I was showing you in videos where you could see that there was no shadows. Most things look black when you were watching a darker scene in a movie. Take a look at the Galaxy S4 on the left. It makes a drastic improvement. You can see that you're able to see from 21 all the way down until 3. 2 and 1 are blacked out, and then 0 is always supposed to be black. Now, just because you can't see 3, 2, 1 doesn't mean that it's actually clipping. I've done some measurements, and it just means that there isn't such a smooth transition from 3 until 0, at least by this picture. But in actual movies, it is not terrible at all. It looks so good in comparison to the Galaxy S3. Now take a look at the Galaxy S3 gamma chart. You can see that the gamma is pretty much along the line until you get to shadows, and then boom, really high gamma. When you have really high gamma, that just makes the image really dark. So if you make the shadows really dark, you lose all details and shadows. Thank you, Samsung. Now look at the gamma chart on the Galaxy S4. Problem fixed. So Samsung was probably like, ooh, yeah, that didn't look so good, and they fixed it. So thank you for doing that. But don't be hopeful that they're going to fix the Galaxy S3 because they just won't. Oh yeah, and as for proof that the Galaxy S4 is not clipping, take a look at this chart that shows near black. You have 10% gray all the way down to 0% gray, which is black, and you can see that it's just a nice drop all the way down in a logarithmic curve. There is no steep drops or anything, so no, it's not clipping. Watching full 1080p content has looked pretty amazing. So when looking at the display on the HTC One versus the display on the Galaxy S4, how much different are they? The most noticeable difference that you're going to see between both of these devices is the sharpness. This guy has a whopping 468 pixels per inch versus the 441 pixels per inch. Now, I've handed both of these phones to people to check out, and the very first impression that people give me is, wow, the HTC One is just so sharp in comparison to the Galaxy S4. Now, the Galaxy S4 isn't lacking sharpness by any means, but because the HTC One is non-pentile and is of an RGB stripe pattern arrangement, it's going to look a lot more sharp. So when I talk about pentile versus non-pentile, what do I really mean by that? When looking at the HTC One, it has an RGB stripe arrangement. That means that every pixel has 3 subpixels, red, green, and blue. And together, all 3 of those subpixels make every single color that you can see. When you look at the Galaxy S4, it is pentile, so it is missing a subpixel per pixel. So it's either going to have green, red, or green, blue, which means that it essentially has more green subpixels than either red or blue. Now, since a subpixel is missing, you can kind of tell that there is one that's missing. It doesn't look as sharp. So Samsung knew that they needed to be able to make a display that looked sharp enough to compete with the likes of 1080p displays. These guys are the real 1080p displays with the RGB stripe arrangements. Now, since HD displays are very difficult to manufacture with AMOLED, they ended up doing something a little bit different. Instead of using the typical pentile arrangement, it is now of a diamond-type shape arrangement. The pixels are no longer oriented up and down, they are now diagonal this way. And they were able to change the shape of the pixel as well. So now the pixels are kind of shaped either like circles, some look a little bit like squares, and they're able to pack even more closely together now. So you still have way more green subpixels, but somehow it works, and for most people, they really can't tell the difference. Another major difference between these two is the contrast ratio. The Galaxy S4 wins hands down, no questions asked about contrast ratio. That means that blacks are actually completely and fully black, where AMOLED pixels are actually able to turn off in order to achieve that black. On the Galaxy S3 and on the Galaxy Note 2, I was seeing that there was still some light leaking from those pixels, so this is the first display that I've seen that is truly off. So while the HTC One has a pretty good contrast ratio for an LCD screen, it is no match for what you can see on AMOLED. Now, the biggest thing that's either going to have you loving the Galaxy S4 or running really fast the other way for something that has an LCD display is the wide color gamut. AMOLED displays are known for having a very wide color gamut, which means it can just display a very wide range of colors. A great LCD display would be preferred to have sRGB gamut, which just means it looks very, very natural and has a full range of color that's very standard across TVs, phones, and other types of LCD screens. Having a wide gamut is not a bad thing, and that's something that people really love about AMOLED displays, is that you have very punchy colors. There's just so much more that you can see, and it's an experience that people really love. The problem is that Samsung really likes to take saturations and just compress them to where things just don't look natural anymore. I find it a little bit ridiculous because AMOLED displays have a very wide gamut. There's no need to try to oversaturate anything. So I have taken more measurements, so let's go check those out. Now check out this gamut chart for my Galaxy S4. The gamut chart on here shows the color space that my Galaxy S4 is able to show. sRGB is usually the most desired color space. It's actually the smaller triangle that's inside of my larger triangle. This larger triangle is simply showing that it has a very large gamut. All of these little dots show the saturations of the colors. When they are evenly spaced, it means that there is no oversaturation or undersaturation. In this case, there's just a slight bit of oversaturation, but it is not as bad as the Galaxy S3 was. As you can see here, the Galaxy S3 was an oversaturation fest. So I am quite happy with the improvements here. And here we have the gamut of the HTC One. You can see that the gamut is pretty much filling the entire triangle, so yay, it's sRGB. And they're actually oversaturating just a little bit on the HTC One, but they did that to give it a little bit of punch. It's not so bad. But I implore you, please go into a shop and look at the Galaxy S4 and the HTC One and see if you can handle the punchy colors of the Galaxy S4, or if you want something that looks more natural. Where the HTC One makes a boo-boo is right here in the gamma chart. You can see that there is a line. That's gamma 2.2. That is what you want. Anything above gamma 2.2, if it's going pretty steep like I showed you before, is going to make the image too dark. And anything that goes below gamma 2.2, if it goes down too far, is going to make it look too bright or washed out. What's going on here is the HTC is using an aggressive dynamic contrast algorithm. So basically, depending on what content that you're looking at, it's supposed to boost the brightness. I suppose this is for readability reasons. But unfortunately, in some content, the midtones and the highlights just get too bright looking. Things start to really wash out, and I'm not really liking it so much. Also, I'm seeing sometimes that it will flicker or it will bounce up and down until it decides to settle. And in most things it looks all right, but really I'm not so happy with it. The Galaxy S4 also has dynamic contrast, but you can see here that it is not interruptive and it's only used as a function to save power. So if an image is white, it's going to dim the image just a little bit so that it helps to save power. But no how, no way does the Galaxy S4 do what the HTC One does. So yes, there are many pluses to the Galaxy S4 display, but you also have to consider that it does have its own downsides as well. One thing that really bothers me about the Galaxy S4 is when I turn the brightness to a very low value. I've seen this kind of behavior across a couple different devices, so I think it's safe to say that if you keep your brightness at about 50% or more, you shouldn't be having that really pinkish looking issue. There also seems to be quite a few different variations for calibrations across these devices. I haven't seen any two devices that look exactly the same in terms of their calibration. So what I've been noticing is that some are a little bit more pinkish, some are a little bit more bluish, some of them get a little bit darker sooner, as you can see here in the gradient. These are two different Galaxy S4s. Some displays were calibrated better and have better colors. Some have a little bit wider of a color gamut. So it's kind of a lottery for which one you're going to get. It doesn't matter between an Exynos version or a Snapdragon version. It really kind of depends on the display's own ability, the factory that calibrated the display, and also if they used the right calibration data or if they did some type of rounding errors and got things wrong. I've also been able to measure that when you change the brightness, just say from 100% down to 50% down to 0%, parts of the image will get lighter and darker. Sometimes the appearance of the shadows will change. Sometimes the face tones will change depending on where you are in the brightness. So it's kind of odd. I looked at the HTC One and it had no such issue. The best thing to do is to find a brightness where the image looks best to you and go with that. The response curve behavior on the Galaxy Note 2 changed as well across the brightness levels. So these variations that I am experiencing are nothing new. It's more about finding a display that you like and sticking with that. Who cares if it has certain variations? As long as you like it, that is really what matters. An interesting issue that a lot of people have been asking me about on the Galaxy S4 is something that we are calling screen smearing. Now, if you look at this connect and share bar, when I just slowly start moving it up and downward, you can see that it looks like it's just smudging, smearing, and if I was to go very fast up and down, people have been able to see purple lines form across the screen. Now this is a problem that's been really annoying people, and people have asked me, is this a software problem or is this a hardware problem? I don't really consider this much of a problem, but this is related to hardware. What Samsung has done with the Galaxy S4 is actually take anything that's black, and it's actually black, meaning that the pixels are truly off. What you're actually seeing with that screen smearing is a bit of a latency, where the pixels are not turning on quite fast enough. Keep in mind that this is a 1080p display and that there are a lot of pixels to drive, so I'm sure that the resolution of this display has a lot to do with this bit of latency. Samsung did release an update, and no, they didn't exactly fix it, but what they did was they took black and they actually turned it on a little bit. Red they turned on a little bit to 8, green they turned on to 8, and blue they turned on to 8. So it still looks very, very, very dark, almost black, but it's been helping a little bit with that smearing. The pixels aren't actually off, so that latency for startup isn't a problem. Another thing that people are noticing and are getting pretty annoyed with is the dynamic contrast. So yes, this phone has dynamic contrast. The HTC One also has dynamic contrast, and it's something that you can't disable. The most annoying thing that people have been noticing though is when they go into something that's white, and if you pull up something that's black or gray, such as the keyboard, it starts to flicker a little bit, or the color changes. If you get rid of that keyboard, it stops flickering. My camera exaggerates this just a little bit, but people can definitely see that it flickers when the keyboard is pulled up, and it also flickers again when the keyboard is pulled downward. So if you are freaking out that your phone is doing this, don't go and run and exchange it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just been programmed into this phone. It cannot be disabled, so just chill. It is not as bad as on the HTC One at all. If you are really noticing that it's going from dark to light, anytime you pull up the keyboard or put the keyboard away, it might be auto adjust screen tone, so you just need to go into display settings, make sure that auto adjust screen tone is turned off. It's meant as a power saving mode. So let me show you exactly what this guy does. If you go ahead and click check, we're going to go back to Google Keep, where I was using as an example. When I click the keyboard off, it dims. When I go ahead and turn the keyboard back on, the brightness goes up. Again, when I take the keyboard away, you can see that it's dimming. And it will do this in web pages, and it drives people nuts. So if that is the case for you, make sure that you go under display and turn auto adjust screen tone off. It's really messing with the white point. It's part of dynamic contrast. I can't stand it. It's been there for a very long time though. Also, under display settings, there is a setting that is called screen mode. You can see that there is adapt display, dynamic, standard, professional photo, and movie. Now, when I was talking about dynamic contrast, no, none of these are going to enable or disable dynamic contrast. It's always going to be on. But if you have adapt display checked, I showed you in the very first video that there is an ambient light sensor, an RGB ambient light sensor, and your image is going to change depending upon the ambient lighting. So that's a nice little feature if it's something that you fancy. If it's doing well for you, go ahead and use it. If not, then don't worry about it. Otherwise, we've got dynamic mode, which really makes things very punchy. We have just standard, which is what I've been using. So here we have the gamut chart. Again, this is in standard mode. Now listen here, I don't care what anybody tells you about movie mode looking better or professional photo mode looking better. Every other mode besides the standard mode is serious crap. This one is oversaturating just a tiny bit. Maybe the white point is just slightly blue, but any other mode, the colors are so wrong that it's just not okay. In professional photo mode, it's supposed to look a lot nicer because they changed the white point, or generally what the white looks like. So just say that you have white that is more bluish looking or white that is more warm looking. This mode is supposed to make it look more neutral, but then they do something a little strange with the colors and it doesn't look so nice. Then with movie mode, it's supposed to take the white point and again make it more neutral so it's not too blue and it's not too warm. Some people who are out of their minds say that it is well calibrated. They're also saying that it makes the colors look more natural, more like sRGB, kind of like a really nice LCD screen. But nah, not really. They are desaturating, but they're doing it in a way that just looks so wrong. Look at cyan. It's not, what? It's like there's no cyan color at all. Look at magenta. It's just completely deviating. As the shade is changing, the saturation is changing, and it's becoming an entirely different color other than magenta. It's just so wrong. It looks like bleeding eyeballs. But hey, play around with it. No one's gonna stop you. Tell me what you think. I also must say that I looked at the Exynos version as well, and the processing is very similar, so don't make an argument between, oh, it's different from Exynos to Snapdragon, because it's not. Your gamut and calibration may be different, but those have to do specifically with the display and not with the extra processing that you see here. The last thing that I want to talk about with AMOLED displays is blue pixel burn-in. When you have static images or images that don't ever change, like the status bar, or like text boxes when you are constantly texting people, or keyboards, if those remain on the display for a very long period of time, you're going to eventually get what is called blue pixel burn-in. So go underneath your dialer, go ahead and push star pound, 0 star pound. You're going to be presented with a diagnostic screen. This may not be available for all phone versions, so if this doesn't work for you, you will know why. I'm going to go ahead and click blue. Of all three set pixels, red, green, and blue, blue is the most high energy. With an AMOLED display, each pixel is actually like its own little light bulb or light emitting diode. Since blue is the most high energy, it tends to burn out over time, worse than either red or green. So if you have a static image such as a status bar or a keyboard or text boxes and they're on the screen for hours and hours a day, regardless of whether this is a pen tile type of AMOLED display or whether it is an RGB stripe arrangement AMOLED display, you will end up getting some type of blue pixel burn-in. I'm starting to see very faint line here. It's something that I can't really see, but I can perceive it when I turn the screen. I've had this phone for a little over a month, so I know that this is a major problem, and Samsung knows that this is a problem as well. What I've seen Samsung do on their most current releases, they have gotten rid of the black bar, and it is now a nice gradient. So it goes from whatever color it is, downward, 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 all the way down to black. So hopefully that's going to help with the blue pixel burn-in. But on my Galaxy Note 2, I killed the poor thing. I have to show you this. This is my Note 2 after 6 months. I can see clearly that there are lines that have been burned into the display by the text box and probably from the keyboard. It looks terrible. When I play games, I can actually see these lines, so it's something that actually affects the whole usage of the phone. If you are an avid and heavy user of your phone, especially with texting, I would recommend getting something with an LCD display because this is going to happen on the S4 as well. So how about in direct sunlight? How does this display perform? I am actually emulating right now sunlight using my very bright bulbs that are of a sunlight color. This display does pretty well outside. I don't have any trouble seeing the display. I do notice that the HTC One is a little bit easier to read in direct sunlight, but this really does just fine. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Please stay tuned for part 3. That's going to be all about the processors. I'm going to compare the Snapdragon and the Exynos version of the Galaxy S4 and talk about the experiences between both of them. So please check out my website, angeloftech.com. There's a forum there that you can go and ask questions. I also will be giving updates as my review is unfolding. I hope what I have showed you today is both informative and useful and can help you ultimately decide if this is the phone for you. Have a good night.